Welcome to another UTS Startups Confessions. All right, so my name is Aaron. I'm the Inspiration Manager here at UTS Startups, and it is my pleasure to welcome Mariam from Media Diversity Australia. Please join me in giving her a big round of applause to welcome her. Thank you. And, before we dive into it, I'd just like to ask, in 10 seconds or less, what is Media Diversity Australia?
Sure. Happy to answer that. And also I just want to acknowledge we're gathered here on Gadigal country, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that anyone in the room, particularly important I think in light of the Voice and the referendum coming up. What does Media Diversity Australia do? How many seconds did you give me?
I give you 10 seconds, but if it spills over.
I just used that up. Okay, so we are working towards an Australian media landscape that looks and sounds like Australia. Quite simple, right? So that's my 10-second version, and then I can elaborate. Do you want me to elaborate?
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think the emphasis on looks and sounds like Australia. Really, really simple. In fact, we often talk about our mission statement is to not exist. I'm not the original founder. The original founder and co-founder of Media Diversity Australia are two journalists. Isabel Lowe is the founder, and Antoinette Lattouf is a co-founder. And as working journalists in across the media sector, they realised that the faces that, and reflect back, say, 15 years, right, 10 years, even 5 years, the faces they were seeing on television just didn't look like theirs. And that's all fair and good if that's equal and proportionate representation, but it's not. It certainly wouldn't look like, those of you that are in this room, Australian television. If you switch into, say, Channel 7 and 9 or 10, the commercial networks, now that's starting to change, but that was the reason why Media Diversity Australia needed to exist, because one, someone had to kind of hold up a mirror to Australian media to say, this is what you look like. Do you like what you see? Is it reflective of broader Australia? And I can tell you that the media execs were kind of like, no, we don't want you to hold up a mirror to us. We don't want to know what we... So it was kind of like holding up a mirror and then kind of going, right, we do have a problem, because you look at ABS data that speaks to how multicultural Australia is across every, obviously around culture, but then there's intersectional identities. And Australian media, in terms of just focusing on news and current affairs, it just did not look and sound like Australia. So the programs that we've run since having been founded in 2017 is to actually help change that.
Wonderful. And I just want to ask everyone here in the room, when we look at, hands up if when you look at the media, it's almost like whatever we see, we just take it as this is what the media is. And hands up if you're like me, and sometimes you don't even notice who the people are in the media. You just kind of see it and it just kind of comes through. Hands up if you realize that you're actually sometimes a little bit oblivious to that. Hands up if you can see that, sometimes it just comes through. Okay, so it seems like this is something which is so pervasive that we almost have forgot to even think to notice it.
Yeah.
So I think that's incredibly valuable to shine that, hold up that mirror, so to speak. And I want to dive into what that is in a little bit. And for everyone who's here or who's here for the first time, we will be in a little bit turning off the live stream and to have audience Q&A. So whatever you'd like to ask, you can ask that spicy Q&A after we turn the live stream off here in the room. But before Media Diversity Australia, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you come to be where you are today? What's that journey been?
Sure. So we talked about how far back do we go, and so I'm going to give you just some key points, right? So I am originally from Afghanistan. I came to Australia as a refugee under the humanitarian program. I didn't speak a word of English. I was roughly around 7, so I was in ESL, English as a second language, and then once I learnt English, I never shut up, and all I do is keep talking. So that was the journey, and I gravitated towards law, and so I did economics and law. I worked as a lawyer, as an in-house lawyer for major banks, so spent a lot of my legal career as a banking and finance lawyer, and then what I guess the way that I've described why I got involved in these issues, which very much social justice, is because for me, racism in particular kind of smacked me in the face. It was just something that I experienced. And look, it's not to say that that's everyone's experiences, but for me, it was a very pivotal experience. I happened to wear a headscarf as an Australian Muslim. I chose to wear a headscarf, and I can tell you, navigating the world in the last 15 or so years was hard because I felt like my identity walked in the room before I did. The assumptions made about me were there immediately, and so with that made life difficult. We were Australian Muslims at the time, spent a lot of time on the news for all the wrong reasons. And as a young person growing up, that was really pivotal because I was terrified to come out and go to work or go to uni the day after a terrorist attack overseas. And that's because and after 9/11 for me is really pivotal because after 9/11 happened, I had the kids at school, I was in high school, and I had the kids at school go, Mariam, your country, Africanistan, because I couldn't say Afghanistan, mind you, is going to get bombed. And I was like, whoa, like overnight I became very racialised. And so, anyway, so the reason I gravitated towards these issues is I've been a lawyer by day, because it's, that's your day job. And then I've been a sort of social justice advocate, anti-racism campaigner / community advocate as a side hustle. Not because I thought I've got nothing to do and I could do extra work, but because I just was like, this is like, it's really impacting me. So I guess I did it for selfish reasons, which is to kind of go, you know what, I feel like I need to say something about this because no, not all Australian Muslims are like that. I mean, it sucks that I have to say that, right? But so it actually really activated me to get involved. So I started doing media, I started writing opinion pieces and I had no idea how to, but I just got involved. And I think that was the journey to all of this.
Yeah, so this was all without necessarily any media training or you just were like, I've got a voice, I'm gonna go in there, I'm gonna dive in.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that a couple of years before you started with Media Diversity Australia, you actually started your own startup.
Yeah.
So you're in Media Diversity Australia, which is a UTS startup, and you started one yourself. What was that tipping point that let you go, or that had you go, I'm going to start something the first time, your startup?
So that's exactly what I was just describing. Because I was experiencing it myself, I just, I was like, all these people are experiencing incidents of racism targeted towards Muslims. So I remember a friend, in fact, very close to this location, walking through Central Station, the really long tunnel that takes forever to get through. She was walking through that tunnel, I think, heading to uni. And, like someone just randomly spat on her and called her an effing terrorist, right? And so this would happen and I'd hear about it on Facebook. She'd post about it and she's like, this horrific thing happened. And I said, well, did you report it? Did you do anything? No. Well, it's, like I wasn't hurt. So I felt like all these things were happening and nobody was documenting it. And also my legal background also kind of no, actually that satisfies the legal definition of assault.
Yeah.
So I found myself educating my friends around, you should be reporting it. And so when they weren't reporting it because they thought the police is not going to do anything about it, that literally, those things, including incidents I faced, drove me to start the Islamophobia Register Australia, which is basically an anti-racism organisation focused on, it collates reports from Australian Muslims, but also anyone, because people might they may look at someone who is a Sikh, for example, and call them an effing terrorist. And then those reports come through to us and it just tracks, and it's such negative, draining work, to be honest, but I felt the need to start something that documented that. Now, 9 years on, those incident reports have been verified by academic teams and then collated into reports and has had international prominence to the point that Indigenous Australians Australians with a disability have actually asked me, how did you do it? Can we start something similar? And I had to give evidence at the Disability Royal Commission about it. So point being that lots of minority communities face these issues and take it upon themselves in a volunteer capacity to do something about it. The connection to Media Diversity Australia, which I was then asked to join several years later as they founded their organisation. And so I started my organisation in 2017, still running. We've now appointed our own sort of CEO equivalent to do that. So that's my side hustle that I still do. And then I've got my day job as Media Diversity Australia's inaugural CEO. And so they appointed me because this was their side hustle. And so it meant that I can drive it forward. And I think the experience I've had with founding another organisation, seeing perhaps some of the pitfalls and the challenges, I think serves us well at Media Diversity Australia, because ultimately the issues that we're also tackling within media is why aren't people who want to, become a news anchor on television and happen to be of, a non-white background, why are they being turned away from those opportunities? Why are we simply not seeing those faces? It's not to say that the journalism cohort is not incredibly diverse, because we know they are. Yes. UTS, etc. Other graduates. But they're not always getting those positions, and the question is why. And we know that, I think what you said was really interesting about being oblivious to who you see on screen. And I think that, but unconsciously it does impact you, because media is kind of like this, a shop front to society. And what you see in the shop front is usually an indication of what's in the shop. And so the Australian media shop front paints a picture that's not accurate as to what Australia actually is. And I think so in an unconscious way, it's impacting our, our perceptions around pop culture and, who can tell the news and who has authority and who doesn't. And if we don't see ourselves in certain positions, we tend to think that we can't be those people.
You can't be what you can't see. And I want to actually check in with the whole room here. Like, there's a lot of people in the room who've travelled from all kinds of parts of the world to study here at UTS. So I want to ask you, when you thought about coming to Australia, and what you actually see when you look around, like, so when you walk the streets and you see people's faces, hands up if you actually looking around realize that the image that you saw about Australia was that stereotypical Australian, maybe blonde hair, maybe blue eyes. And when you look out in reality, it's very, very different. Hands up, you can see it's actually much more multicultural here in Sydney. Hands up if you notice that, Right, so I think that's something which I think is, what you said was what we put out into the world is very different from what's real, especially here in Sydney, but also in Melbourne. And a lot of the different parts of Australia. And a lot of people often ask us, when's the right time to start a startup, or when's the right time to dive in? So you left your law career in-house in Westpac and in the finance sector and different things like that. Was that something which was an easy choice, or what was that like? And what was that like, especially with friends and family? There it is. Yep.
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Look, it wasn't easy, because it was easier to explain to my family. It was easier for them to go, Mariam's a lawyer. like people got that, and then it's like, what do you do now? But I think, so I both like the fact that I left my career, but I also hate it. And the reason I say that is because it shouldn't be up to people who have lived experience to go and tackle racism all the time, because it's actually bloody tiring. It's really tiring to kind of be the person, if it's an issue impacting you, you are both impacted personally by the issue, and you're also trying to fight against it at the same time. And so I've kind of always thought you shouldn't have to quite literally have skin in the game in order to care. But it means that the responsibility falls to people like us. And I can't help but kind of think about what's happening with The Voice right now and Indigenous Australians and the fact that there's this pressure to have a position on it, to have a view, and somehow that they're all homogenous and have the same view. But it's when you look at the statistics, they're the ones that are impacted by it. They're the ones that, when you compare incarceration rates and you compare the likelihood of, in terms of life and all of that, they're impacted negatively by the status quo, and yet we're also expecting them to be able to fight the injustice. So anyway, long story short, I think leaving my career to do this, it made sense for me at a practical level in that I probably wouldn't have thought to do it, but my boss nominated me for an award, and then I got this award, and then it opened my eyes to this whole sector, and I was like, oh wow. And so I got involved in that, and it's very rewarding, but it's also exhausting because I'm very invested in it. But also it means that people with lived experience are going to know the nuances and able to tackle these issues as well.
And what's that response been like from those communities? Like, it must be incredibly powerful to hear what they say when, like, they see different faces, or when they see that they can take action themselves. What are some of those highlights, and are there any highlights that you didn't expect to see along that journey?
Well, what we do with a lot of the programs that we run is that we actually help students in particular, but also other, people that have kind of wanted to enter journalism but have just not bothered. We try and help them get jobs in commercial and public broadcasters, in media companies. And so we track their career paths. So they go from going, I don't think I could ever work at a commercial network, I don't think I could ever be on television, to then doing a program through us where we mentor them, we provide them support, we connect them to jobs and opportunities, and then we track their progress. And we actually help them. We don't just go, off you go to Channel 7 and then, And then we track their progress, and then they end up landing a permanent role at one of these companies. And so I think those are the heartwarming stories where we are starting to, and those of you that have been maybe, paying attention to television, I don't know, no one actually switches a television on these days. I know it's digital content, but if you're starting to see in the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, we are starting to see faces telling the news, curating the news that look more like the Australia that we're used to. And so that change, while we're not taking full credit for it, we're kind of saying we helped change that, because some of the research the Media Diversity Australia has been doing, the media companies don't like it because, like I said, it holds up a mirror to them, but it has actually helped shift the dial. We okay, audio? Yeah.
Sound in the room up? Can you hear us okay at the back?
Okay, great.
Just turn it up a bit, yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So I'd say the communities that are impacted by this, it's not just journalism students. We actually run programs that actually helps community advocates actually get involved with talking to media. So that could be, because often what happens, and I know this, firsthand, you are just kind of thrown into the spotlight. So I had zero media experience, and yet I'd be called upon to give, hey, do you want to do a live TV broadcast? Tell us your opinion about what's happening in XYZ country related to Australian Muslims. And I'd then be like, oh crap, like I've not done this before. Like, well, and you kind of fall over and then stand up again, you fall over and then you learn, right? But what we're trying to do is say, well, some communities are going to be thrown into the spotlight and they should be prepared. So we offer them media training, we offer them, political literacy, we offer them a whole host of things so that if inevitably they are thrown in the media spotlight, that they can be prepared. But also we connect, whether it's News Corp Australia, people from the Daily Telegraph, ABC, SBS, Channel 7, 9, 10, AAP and the Daily Oz. These are some of our members. Those of you that maybe follow the Daily Oz online on Instagram, they're members of ours. So we try and connect them to community advocates, to various people that may be speaking in media. It could be like an economist or someone of a legal background or whatever. We connect them so that they're not running around at the last minute trying to find someone to speak to the issue.
And I can imagine that on top of it being a brand new experience and being daunting just by being a brand new experience, like I imagine that there's so many different things that might go through these people's minds. Like, is the interviewer going to ask me a gotcha question? Are they going to try and flip my words around? Are they going to get a quote that is going to be put onto social media and I'm going to get cancelled even though it's nothing got nothing to do with what I actually mean? So I think, like, hands up, by the way, if someone asked to interview you on national news tonight or tomorrow, if you'd be terrified by that prospect. And hands up if you're like, yeah, I'd go for that. I'd go for that straight away. Maybe 2 or 3 people. Okay. Yeah, good. And, you know, we've talked about the landscape being not representative of what we see, like, day to day in Australia. Like, what are some of the challenges as we're starting to shift that you're working on, or that you see?
So some really prominent examples where it becomes an issue is when Black Lives Matter happened and it was being discussed on live television. I think there was this sort of now infamous segment on Channel 7 where the news breakfast journalists and co-hosts were trying to discuss Black Lives Matter. And none of them had any lived experience, all being of presumably an Anglo-Saxon background. And as the interviews were happening live, there's a whole bunch of mishaps that happen in those kind of, you know, whether it's having an understanding of the history of, you know, the movement in the US, you know, so that's where having different opinions and diversity of opinions and lived experiences is important, because that person can actually say, actually, no, the history is X, or that, and because it's live, you can't plan it, right? No, you can't prepare in advance. Like, you either know it or you don't. And I think the other thing about diversity, it's not just diversity for diversity's sake. It's not just having a couple of visually looking different. It's all of us bring a richness of our different experiences. And also, you don't know what you don't know, right? So people don't kind of wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to say something really racist today, although there's some politicians in Australia that I reckon fit that bill.
Yes.
But for the most part, most people are not like, I'm going to be really rude and I'm going to be a homophobe today and I'm going to be
People don't
really...
wake up saying, I'm going to be a horrible person to the first person I meet. No, they don't do that.
No.
Usually,
You know, they don't, or a producer, like a TV producer doesn't go, I'm deliberately going to exclude certain voices from our coverage. Like, you know, like, it just goes to show you don't know what you don't know. If we expect, you know, if you're bringing someone in to speak about, I don't know, menstruation, then it should, you know, like, it should be someone that has expertise, someone that has lived experience. And sometimes when that lived experience is lacking and that diversity of thought is lacking, you are not telling a story in its whole richness. And so therefore Australian viewers are missing out on perspectives. And you might say, well, actually, I'm oblivious to that. I hadn't even realised. But if you think about the Australia that we have today, you want every Australian to grow up thinking they belong here.
Yes.
And when we see bits of ourselves in pop culture, whether it's walking down the street and I see that St George Bank, you know, has a post about Ramadan, or there's a post about Happy Chinese New Year, Happy Lunar New Year, things like that, it resonates with us. And we go, you know what, I belong. And I think that's what's important, because as my daughter, who's now 9, was growing up, I was really conscious of all the toys I was buying her. And I was like, I want to get a toy that kind of looks a bit like her, because there's literally research that speaks to young kids, say of an African American background. They've done an experiment. They put all those dolls in front of them. I don't know if you know about this. They put dolls in front of them, and they go to each child, which one do you want to pick? And the child that has darker skin keeps gravitating towards the doll with light skin, like blonde hair, blue eyes, light skin. And it's like, hang on, like, that doesn't look like her, right? And so what the experiment shows is that we tend to gravitate towards what we think is normal. And what we think is normal, according to research, is that stereotype. And so I think this is why representation is important, because even unconsciously it has an impact on you.
Because when we're the centre of, when we're seeing things from our perspective, it's hard to see where we fit into it. So really, we've got the bits and pieces out there, because we're going to realise at some point the mirror's going to show up wherever it shows up. And you know, what does success look like? So you said the success for MDA is for no longer to be needed. Like, what's kind of required to get to that world, or what does that look like in the next 5 years or so?
Well, what it looks like is a proportionate representation on screen, behind screen, in newspapers, on radio, digital mediums, I think that's what it looks like. And it's also, it's not just having, a set number of people on there. I think it's about saying, if someone wants to be a journalist, someone wants to be a news commentator, a media commentator, the only reason they shouldn't be able to do it is because they suck, right? Because they're just not good at it. Not because of their name, not because of what they look like, not because of the colour of their skin, not because of the accent that they might have. It should not be based on those reasons that they don't get those jobs. So, and the research so far shows that that's not the case. It shows there's literally research that speaks to, and this is really depressing and I'm sorry in advance, but the research that speaks to the fact that if you have a Middle Eastern sounding name, an Asian Australian sounding name, an Indigenous sounding name, like a whole host of different ethnicities, if you apply for jobs, like you put all your resumes out there, and I reckon there would be experiences perhaps in this room, if you put your resumes out there, you are less likely to get a call back. And this research was done recently by Uni of Melbourne, and it showed that in the 10 years or so since this research was done before, the numbers are still bad, because we go, well, actually it doesn't matter what you look like, and if you've got experience and you've got that degree and you've got that, you'll get the job. But the reality, however, and this is where unconscious bias comes into it, that recruiters kind of have all these stereotypes about different names. And so that what they've done is they realised if you do copy-paste resumes, send them out, all you do is change the name. So the experience is the same, everything is the same. When you change the name and you put, example, John Smith, you're more likely to get a call back. So we have a group of people, and I experience this myself, who go, you know what, I'm going to change my name on the resume. But I mean, the fact is there's inequalities, and our work is to try and reduce those inequalities. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of them, but it's about allowing people opportunities. If they want to get a job in that field, they should be able to.
And I think the final question I'll ask you before we dive into the private Q&A is, often startups are thought of as these innovative things, and often that's to do with technology and how things are happening. I think that, and this is my opinion, like in terms of MDA, like the work that you're doing is almost much more critical in the sense that it's dealing with those unconscious biases, those things which are uncertain, and that's something which technology doesn't necessarily have an answer to. In fact, the current state of technology makes it so easy for those things to just perpetuate and continue. So this isn't a is technology good, or what technology are you going to use? But coming aside from that, given the uniqueness of this challenge, I guess given the humanness of this challenge, what are some of the things which you're looking at, or that you can see are the big challenges that we need to, as a community, as a society, need to step up and tackle?
I mean, I think that's a really great observation in that you can't rely on technology to kind of solve this issue, because technology, like you said, perpetuates those stereotypes. And a lot of, I mean, that's a whole can of worms to get into. But I think it's a very human problem, which can only therefore be resolved through a lot of human interaction. And often bias happens because we have a fear, happens for multiple reasons, but sometimes there's a fear of the other. And so therefore, if we've not met people and interacted with people from different walks of life, we just have a bunch of assumptions about them. I was very conscious of this, and this is, for me, I use social media as a way to actually tackle that, to kind of go, well, here's my example, and this is who I am, this is, and that is a way to kind of, I think the human-to-human interaction actually helps get rid of those biases. And then, but also, it's also about, then the problem, of course, is it's a lot of work if one or two people constantly go around trying to have human interactions with people, right? So that's where I think change needs to happen by raising awareness, using real platforms that can reach so many people, raising awareness about this issue, and then kind of going, the status quo is not fixing itself. They are not invested, Australian media executives, and the research shows this. The last time we did this piece of research, about 5 years ago, every single news director in Australia was male and white. Now, fast forward to when we do the study again, that's starting to change. We're starting to see more women in these jobs. So the point is that I don't think you can just wait for the status quo to change itself, because it's not. So it is about raising awareness. It's about then almost kind of applying pressure and saying things need to change. They're not doing it on their own. And so therefore what I've always advocated for, particularly around these issues, is actually research that holds up a mirror, tells you where your problem is, and then also provides recommendations. And some of those recommendations in the media sector is targets, and actually introducing targets and encouraging people to change. Channel 7 is a massive media company, commercial network. How many women do you reckon are on their board? Just
Show off
take a
hands
guess.
with fingers.
How many women? Just, yeah. That's right. They've got 2 women on their board, which is a good thing that you got that right, but it's crap because when you reflect on there's 12 board members or whatever. And I guess what I'm saying is if you don't have, this is women, if you don't have female representation, that has a flow-on impact to what you're seeing on your screens. So I think it's, and then if you compare the other boards, that lived experience isn't there. And that's the stuff that I think targets and other things can help resolve. Yeah.
I'm hearing all the R words, like real experiences shared by real people, creating real human connection to create some recommendations. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
For everyone who's joining us online, we're going to finish up the online component right now. We do this every single Friday, followed by private Q&A, followed by the best wood-fired pizza in Sydney and the UTS Startups community drink. So please feel free to join us next time. And thank you once again, Mariam, for being here.